I went back for one last adventure over on Netflix with the making of Stranger Things 5 documentary, and I was shocked to hear so many things, like this show was never really finished. Welcome back, everyone. Let me clarify. When I say that, what I mean is, while this show was being made, the finale had not been written. That is just one of the many things that I learned watching this documentary, which is why I wanted to come back and have a little chat with you, because this has put into my mind a lot of context for things that I thought were kind of weird. And now that I've seen the documentary, I understand why they were the way they were. I think there were some decisions here that I still feel are weird in terms of just like being the best decisions for production. But there's also some decisions that were made here and just some problems that, of course, they had to overcome during the shooting, which is normal with any production, that allowed me to understand why some things looked the way they did. For example, the final fight. So let's talk about that for a second. Having seen what the rehearsal looked like for it, I now understand why it went the way it did. And when I say the final fight, I'm mainly talking about the stuff that happened outside of the inside of the Mind Flayer. When we are outside of the Mind Flayer and we're fighting it with our group of kids, they basically were in a space where they had the ground, right? The ground is real, but everything else around them is pretty barren, right? So it's just a bunch of blue screen walls around the ground. And obviously the Mind Flayer is CGI, so we don't have a Mind Flayer there. I was saying I think it would have been really cool if they did some element of a practical Mind Flayer, like even if some of the legs, parts of the legs were around. I think that would have been cool. But they didn't do any of that. They just did it full CG. And I will say the Mind Flayer looks amazing. But the problem you run into, we see in the rehearsal, the Duffer Brothers, you can hear, they're ordering the kids to move around. And they're saying, you know, first you see this thing, and then there's like a giant boulder that comes, and they're having them react to all of this stuff by calling it out over like a megaphone. And they're looking up and they're reacting, and then they're like, now you get out of there. And because it's rehearsal and they don't know which way to go, and they also have no visual element to this acting, they all kind of go almost in different directions. And then the actor that plays Steve comes back and says, hey, wait a minute, can we get some clarification on, like, when you say we should go, like, are we going back? Like, where are we going to? Because obviously get out of there is like, to where's safe? Where is everything? But I have to imagine that that would be very challenging as an actor. And I always think when we deal with a lot of blue screen and green screen, it's just a lot of work you're putting on the actor to create everything in their imagination. There's already a lot that you have to do technically and just in terms of emotionally and physically and putting yourself in a moment mentally. So to add, like, also imagine something giant is here. You don't really have a reference. I mean, maybe they had something and we didn't see it, but that was an interesting part. However, I would like to point out that the second part of the final fight, they actually built the inside of that Mind Flayer. A lot of it is really built. They built a giant set, which is something that people don't usually do anymore. Everyone does look to blue screens and green screen to create these larger than life moments. And I have to give some props to Stranger Things because it looked like a lot of what they did was practical. The Duffer Brothers really wanted to try to keep things as practical as they possibly could. They really wanted things to be really happening, which is helpful for your performers and is also just, I think, really cool because it looks great on screen. And I also feel like that's why Volume 1 and I would say even parts of Volume 2 look so dang good. There are parts of it that look really, really, really good. The attack, for example, on the Wheeler household, I thought all of that looked amazing. And they really just did a lot of that stuff. The final fight at the end of Volume 1, the Volume 1 final fight with them in the military compound, and everyone's like running around, and we had that like one really long shot. They went through how they filmed all of that, and I thought that was really cool. But ultimately, something that I think that is challenging with Stranger Things, it's a blessing and it's a curse, is the creative process of how they made this final season, and in general, it sounds like how they made the show. And one thing I will say is that it sounds like the creative process for the Duffer Brothers didn't really differ that much from their approach to season 1. I think what really changed for them in terms of where we are from season 1 to season 5 is that each season has kind of gotten bigger than the last season. And so with season 5, I think there was a lot of pressure on them to make this season like as spectacular as possible. They really wanted it to be this beautiful marriage of just big spectacle and, action and horror, and also these character moments, this emotional kind of grounding. So it's part emotion and it's part spectacle, and they wanted to merge those two things together. And there are moments where I actually feel like they succeed pretty well in doing that. And these big moments can even heighten the emotions of the characters in the scenes. So those things can feed into each other really nicely. But I think the problem that they ran into with this is that they just wanted to go too big. Like, you think about how much this show cost. You think about how much footage there is from filming. I mean, it took them over 280 days to film Stranger Things. I think they said it was over 6,700 setups, and it was over 600 shots. I want to say it was like 680 shots, they said in the documentary during their kind of wrap speech. I think they said it was a petabyte of footage, which is a lot of footage. I can't imagine how many editors worked on Stranger Things, but it's got to be more than one. I think that in going so big, they lost some of the magic of what really makes this show sing. And sometimes less really is more, especially in the world of film. So that's, I think, a challenge that they had, was just there's a lot of pressure with this being the final season, with this show have gone on for so long, for them to make it really big. And I think they also wanted to make it big. And I just feel like some of that took away from the grounded nature of the show and the characters and the relationships, which is honestly what I come to Stranger Things for. It is cool that it's a blend of things, that it's like a coming of age story that's also a horror story, which is not something that you normally see. But it's also really cool because it's the characters that I love. And this cast, and the fact that they've been together for 10 years, they just have chemistry like none other, And you see that in the documentary as well, too. That's one of my favorite things about watching it, was getting to see everyone coming together to make this final season and what it meant to everyone. And kudos to everyone that worked on this season, whether they were on production or whether they were cast. Like, everyone really loves this show, I think, that worked on it, and it was a labor of love, and that is a beautiful thing to see. And I do love that the Duffer Brothers are so collaborative when they work together. I mean, yeah, so they didn't have the finale written, but for them that seems to not be abnormal. And I will say, in television, there is a lot of times TV where, you get your scripts like a few days before you're going to shoot something. People are still writing when you shoot. That's not abnormal per se, but I just feel like for something of this scope, for something that is so big, it is a challenge when that's part of your creative process, is writing as you're doing the show, because it's so big that it really requires a lot of specificity, and that just wasn't there as much, I think, when some of the production teams needed it. Now, the plus side to the way that this works, the fact that, we don't have a set script necessarily. You do have plot points. The Duffer Brothers knew where they were going with it. I think they always knew that 11 wasn't going to be making it out, and they were just trying to decide at what point do we, the audience, kind of get to know that? At what point is 11 making that decision? So there are some conversations around that. There was an interesting conversation about, during that final fight, how to even populate the area. Do you have demogorgons and demobats and all these things? And there was this discussion that one of the writers brings up about, like, maybe there might be too much demogorgons in the show and you don't want to have like demogorgon fatigue. So maybe just focus on the main players of that fight and leave it there. And there was even an idea of the cast who are playing these kids wanted to be there for that final battle. And so the whole idea of them going after the Mind Flayer was kind of something the Duffer Brothers wrote in to also collaborate some of the ideas from their cast. And I love that as writers and directors and other directors, even on the set, you see, are taking input from their actors and actually coming to their actors and asking them even, like, what do you think about this? Like, what do you think your character would do, or how would they respond? And trusting the people that have been playing these characters for years to make those choices. And I think that that is really cool. And they did the same thing with their production crew. You know, they'd come to them with an idea of what was initially known in the finale as the pain tree, which we later come to know as the inside of the mind flayer. Once I think that had been established in the story, I don't think they fully knew that they were going that way, but I think the Duffer Brothers had talked about before this idea of how they really did want to bring the Mind Flayer back. So I think they always knew they were going to do that, and then that probably just kind of evolved into like, what if the pain tree is the Mind Flayer? Which I think is such a cool moment still and such a cool reveal. They even with that had an idea of what it was going to look like, but their production crew also didn't have specific instructions, so they had to kind of fill in the gaps, which it's really cool that the Duffer Brothers trust their team, but I have to imagine that that would also be stressful on set. It's cool that Stranger Things is such a collaborative process, and that over the years, I imagine, as these crew members and the cast and everyone have gotten to know each other, it's only probably become more collaborative as time has gone on. But it also is kind of unfortunate because it means that the vision gets a little muddy, right? Because instead of it being fully the Duffer Brothers vision, it's Duffer Brothers and co. It's Duffer Brothers and their team who is all having some input on this, and then they're taking kind of the bits and pieces that they think work, that they feel they want to give to their crew and to their cast, and rolling with that. And also sometimes it's just, you know, you don't really have time to do it unless you fill in the gap, which is stressful. At one point they talk about making that final Mind Flayer, the Pain Tree set, the giant set, and they did it, I think they said 13 or 16 weeks. And they had 12 sound stages with 12 sets. But they had to dismantle some sets to make space for this, which is insane. There's a lot that they discuss here, and I will say getting to see some of the table reads in this was just so sad and so cool, especially when they read that final episode together once they finally get it in their hands. I have to imagine it was probably also hard to write that because, you know, it's the end of an era. It's the end of something that has been a decade of your life. But hearing them all read it and seeing the emotional response that they had reading these lines, I mean, wow, seeing Finn Wolfhard's response as Mike to him reading that scene with Millie Bobby Brown as 11 in the cold read, I was like, where was that emotion in the scene? I wish they had let them bring some of that into the scene. I don't know if that was a director choice. I may have been too hard on Finn Wolfhard because I feel like he does have an emotional connection to this character and response, but I'm wondering if it was a directorial choice to kind of pull back a little bit on the emotion there. At least in the cold read, he had a lot of emotion. And that could just be him as an actor having that feeling as a person, you know, because it's also the end of this show for him. And obviously the idea of Mike and Eleven's story ending the way it did is very sad. But he was crying and Millie was crying and I was crying and it was beautiful. The whole cast was crying. It was amazing to watch. Just want to say, everyone that worked on this show, you know, I know it wasn't perfect for me and I know that there are some issues that I have with it, but I just want to say thank you for all your hard work because you gave up a lot of time and a lot of effort. You put a lot of effort into this show and I appreciate it. And if you haven't watched One Last Adventure, The Making of Stranger Things 5, I would definitely recommend checking this out on Netflix. I personally had a great time watching it. It is kind of long, much like the final season. It's about 2 hours, but they don't even go into everything, and there is a lot to go into here. And it's really cool to see some of the practical effects that they used in some of these episodes and to see just how much of a personal journey this was for the Duffer Brothers. And I'm very excited to see what projects the Duffer Brothers work on next. Despite the fact that this ended a little bit disappointingly for me in areas, overall I had a great time with this show. And it's a lot of pressure. And now I understand some of the pressure that they were experiencing. That's all I have for this one. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts on the making of Stranger Things and just your thoughts on the show overall, the final season, some of your favorite moments. Let's use this as a moment to, you know, kind of celebrate some of the things that we loved about this show and some of our dreams for potential futures for these amazing people that worked on it, and potentially the Stranger Things franchise, because there's going to be at least a little bit more. So who knows? Maybe there'll be more than that. I'll see you down in the comments, and until next time, friends, as always, stay nerdy. Bye! And if you missed the last time I talked about Stranger Things, you can check that out here.